Hi everyone, and welcome to our next unit. In this unit, we're going to be talking about educating students with multiple disabilities, including deafblindness. And I'm getting excited about Halloween, so I needed to put my Snoopy image up there. Nothing to do with the topic at hand, just adorable Snoopy on top of a pumpkin. Just a couple of announcements. A reminder that you had the Plan of the Blind paper due September 23rd. And again, I want to apologize for confusing everyone and saying it was due this week. I just had a very busy, rough week, and I was making errors left and right in your class. So I apologize for confusing you. Getting back on track and drinking a lot of coffee this week. The other thing that we have coming up, and this will be for due on September 30th as a discussion post, is that I want you to start looking, you'll see this within this week's module. You'll see what the assignment entails exactly, but I wanted you to start looking for, once you get through the materials in the unit, do a little scavenger hunt for anything that you want to kind of learn more about or dig deeper on, and then just present that to your classmates, and you guys can respond to each other. Responses, by Wednesday are not necessary for this post, but I would like you to respond if there's something that catches your eye or strikes you as something you're also interested in. So just kind of, have a little chat amongst yourselves about the resources. But that's just basically to get you guys thinking about areas of interest, because it does so happen in our field very often that people can kind of find their niches. You're going to be exposed to a lot of different children on your caseloads and in your rehabilitation positions and kind of anything that you do. And so I often find that people kind of build the populations that they love to work with and kind of keep on doing that for most of their career, which can be a little bit hard to do if you're an itinerant. But it also, what you're interested in is sort of what gets fostered as part of your professional life. And so it's sort of interesting. So that final discussion will be due on September 30th. And then I will have details on your final examination coming up, and I'll try to have that available as soon as I can so you can start to work on it at least a few weeks out. But Dr. Correa Torres and I have to get together with that. This is the second lecture, introductory lecture in this unit. The first one is Dr. Correa Torres, and her area of expertise is deafblindness. So it's an old lecture, but I just wanted to put it in because she offers some very valuable information in that area. But this little PowerPoint is a presentation just kind of on the historical perspectives of educating students with multiple disabilities, including deafblindness. So, just thinking about how the way we educate students with visual impairments and multiple disabilities has evolved over the years. Prior to the 1960s, students in School for the Blind really only had the disability of visual impairments. So they had what we would call kind of traditional ocular blindness, something wrong with the eye or the parts of the eye that literally just caused them not to be able to see. And those children, as I put it, happen to be sort of typically cognitively intact. And so no other discernible issues, very small percentage of the population. I don't know what the population, the percentage of was at time. But even at this time, we continue to be an extremely low incidence disability at about 1% of the population. Now, that being said, think about as you go through this presentation that children now with multiple disabilities make up the brunt of your caseload usually. So only intellectually capable students with deafblindness were educated at residential schools, and then students with severe disabilities were institutionalized or kept at home with no schooling whatsoever. So think about that in respect to kind of what you see in schools today and what you're studying about, and it's actually quite phenomenal to think about. The other thing is that we, of course, are only a very small blip on the map of time in our lifetimes and in our careers. So even though if you've been working for 30 years, you still have been working for a very small time in the field of visual impairment and blindness, is still very actually new if you think about it. And so that's why we're continuing to figure things out as we go. We're still a very young field with a lot of things to learn. And I do believe that we've come quite a long way for students with services in a short amount of time. So the vision of students who were not in educational settings was not really evaluated because they didn't have accurate tests. They certainly didn't have valid tests. They didn't have accurate medical and ophthalmological tests and technology like we do today makes it a little bit easier to see where what errors in vision there are when in regard to the eyes and acuity, certainly. But then also we did not have at the time, we did not have brain scanning that could tell us what's going on in the brain. And more often than not, children with severe disabilities have some sort of cognitive, some sort of developmental and brain dysfunction that simply doesn't, or not simply, but very complexly does not allow them to access visual information in a typical way. So the services in visual impairment were not deemed appropriate if they couldn't speak, read, or write. So in other words, what teachers knew and what teachers knew how to do could not be applied to students like this. I've been in meetings where I've been told by teachers of the visually impaired, that a child does not have literacy if they cannot speak, read, or write. And I completely disagree with that. And hopefully through this unit, you'll kind of learn why that is not the right approach. So in 1970s, of course, we had the Education for All Handicapped Act, which was a precursor to the laws that we have today for including students with visual impairments and educating them in least restrictive environments, and IDEA law. Students with severe disabilities began to receive educational services after that. So this was really the beginning of how we would kind of figure this out. More residential schools took on the role of serving students with disabilities as the students with visual impairment shifted to public schools. The population of students included more non-readers and students whose goals were non-academic. So you're starting to see more children with disabilities within regular school settings, shifting away, of students with visual impairment shifted away from schools that just served children with visual impairment, schools for the blind, and then the children who were going to start being served that had multiple disabilities moving into the schools for the blind as a more appropriate setting and a place where they could be educated. So kind of stepping away from that institutional model into sort of a different institutional model, but one that was more of an education base, and I'd say less of a role of sort of medical, emotional, and physical type restraint, and actually, look to educating these students with multiple disabilities. So changing biological and medical factors increased with numbers of students with multiple disabilities. So as we were talking about before, medical technology has allowed more premature children with brain injuries to survive. Conditions that affected only vision were modified by improved medical technology. So for example, retinopathy of prematurity and cataracts. And many teachers of the visually impaired needed to learn new skills. So to talk a little bit about retinopathy of prematurity was at one time the leading cause of blindness in children. Retinopathy of prematurity now, with technology, has been almost completely eradicated. So I've had children in my caseload that had a certain, and ROP comes in stages, and you'll learn about that as you go on in your profession here. But basically, you can have ROP, and like it can't be that bad, and then you can have all the way to ROP where but most of the parts of the eye, including the retina, are involved, or there are always the retina is involved, but most parts of the eye are involved, and they're involved very severely. And so you can have a total loss of vision. And retinopathy of prematurity is due to sort of an explosion in the blood vessels when children are treated for prematurity in the NICU. And unfortunately, it's something that helps to keep them alive. Or fortunately, it's something that helps to keep them alive. But unfortunately, it can do a lot of damage to their optic nerves. So anyways, what happens is now we treat it, and you'll still see it on children's, medical diagnoses and reports. However, in a lot of cases, it's been treated either with medicine or laser surgery, something like that. And so those children, though, basically survive, and then they end up having, they can end up having other neurological visual impairments. And so this is really why we've seen such a burst, an explosion in children with CVI and cerebral visual impairment, brain-based visual impairment, whatever you'd like to call it, because we have babies, and our medical technology is so much better to keep premature children surviving. And this is true pretty much all over the world right now. 51% of TVIs consider themselves unprepared to teach students with multiple disabilities. So just a little excerpt from a paper, but that is still the case today. If our personal preparation programs, we need to do better and better jobs of helping teachers to understand how to serve these populations. So since the 1970s, the educational trends provide new opportunities and have created new challenges. So talking a little bit about the legal foundations, and I can't go into super huge detail here because I won't have a lot of time left, but providing opportunities and access for students was definitely one of the advantages. Creating public awareness for disability is another advantage. And then, the legal enforcement of rights. So making sure that children were truly being served to the letter of the law. And it also provided us as teachers of the visually impaired to have a legal foundation for teaching Braille, accessible literacy, for teaching, for doing our assessments, which figure into the child's educational program. That's all built in legal foundations, and you'll get more into that as you progress throughout this program. Some of the limitations, though, were sort of having labels placed on children, and all the paperwork and systems that are involved in the education of children in any special education system, and then also professional advocacy. So figuring out what are the type of things you can advocate or had to be advocated for as a teacher of the visually impaired in order to do your job sufficiently, advocating to administration for time, for caseload management, and that type of thing. For inclusion, I have a slide for that just because that's really one of the most important things here is that, of course, you can see the advantages are what you would think of having role models, being challenged academically and rising to expectations. And then also on the peer side, exposing peers to a diverse range of children for them to interact with. The challenges are creating the adaptations to make sure that children are successful, consistency and frequency of practice, so making sure that children are getting the services that they need, and also making sure that across the board people are using the best and most evidence-based practices that they can. And then also individualization, so understanding that there are ways that we do things that are successful, but in order for them to be successful for every child, they have to be individualized and meet the needs and the sort of unique challenges of the child themselves. So active learning is something that you can totally look for in your scavenger hunt, and you're going to hear a little bit about it, but we've got two sort of major players in the field, Dr. Jan van Dijk and Lily Nielsen, and those were two of our active learning sort of giants in the field who really talked about students learning from their sensory environment and how we can approach students with severe and visual impairments and provide them with sensory stimulation in order to build on skills. So that's really, really important. And if you're at all interested in and will be serving students with multiple impairments, you will learn about them. For team services, so understanding that the more experts you have on a team, the better you can serve the child, making sure that the family is participating, and then collaboration and mutual support. So really the only way in my perspective and many people's perspective to educate students with visual impairments and multiple disabilities as well as you can is to really understand that it's a collaborative effort and that it's really a team approach, and things have to be consistently done across the spectrum of the child's school day and at home and in the community in order for them to really be successful in life. And then, I'm sorry, I skipped over functional learning. Did I stop at functional learning? For functional learning, it's really talking about things that are related to life skills, to building independence, and to building social skills. So all of those kind of parts of the ECC that eventually came about through this sort of work. And then also promoting communication for these students, which is, as I've said before, kind of the most important thing you can do because communication and access go hand in hand. Team services we just went over, and then technology, of course. So having access to information and materials as needed to provide students with increased independence so that they can communicate, so that they can participate in academic work. The challenges, of course, is the cost. It's the complexity of understanding and mastering technology yourself so that you can teach it to students. And then also the issue that, is technology, does it provide communication that's a substitute for natural communication? So that's just kind of a philosophy sort of stance to think about. The other problem with technology is it's very dynamic and therefore it takes a lot of time to learn, and it's constantly changing and has to constantly be kept up with. So we went over inclusion. Okay, and that's it. I'm done. So think about some of these things. One of the things about teaching students with multiple disabilities, of course, is there is no one size fits all approach. But don't worry about that. In your career, you're going to be exposed to all kinds of different students, and from all of those students, you will learn what works and what does not work. And that's kind of how you base your what you base a lot of what you do on with students as you assess them and as you teach them. So I hope this has been somewhat helpful for your unit this week. I look forward to hearing your feedback about it. And please know there's a lot of reading. There's a lot of things to do. But keep it all for future reference as well, because it will all be useful to you. Have a great week. Thanks.